Hi there, this is Wafala Vedat. You're listening to the Women Power Podcast, a subsidiary platform to the Women Power Summit, the largest event in MENA, with the aim of empowering women and helping them achieve their absolute highest potential. Each week on the Women Power Podcast, you will hear honest, vulnerable, authentic, real conversations from inspiring women. These women will share their experiences and stories into what it takes to build a successful business and career. The podcast will share insight and inspiration and hopefully inspire action and lead change. Sophia Jennings is a writer and producer based between London and LA. She was the head of content at Jameela Jamil's new media company. Prior to Sophia served as creative executive of the Creative Studio. As a journalist, Sophia has interviewed actors, musicians, and activists for NYLON magazine and MTV. Welcome, Sophia. How have you been doing during COVID? How was the situation in the States? Which part of the States are you from, or where are you staying, by the way?
So many good questions. I feel I'm so grateful to be on this podcast. It's my first podcast ever that I've been a guest on, so it's a bit of a big deal, and it's also a bit terrifying that the idea of not being able to edit everything I say is totally terrifying. But yeah, just thank you. I'm so happy to be here. COVID, I have been unbelievably lucky, to be totally honest. I was in New York City for January, February, and March of 2020. And around March 9th, I looked at Jameela and I said, I think I need to leave because the news was terrifying. And I had my family back in London saying, come home now. So I kind of, we were shooting Jameela's YouTube channel in New York. I was living in Brooklyn with some friends from university and I was just like, time to go. So I came back to London expecting to be back for about a month. And it's now been 7 months, which is honestly the longest I think I've sat still in one place in years. So it's been a really interesting experience in learning what happens when you just sit still. It's like normally in my career and in my life, every time I get sort of bored, I move or I go do something else or I plan a trip. And the last 6 months has been a wonderful exercise in what happens when you get bored and you sit still. And the answer was, like all of us, I think, obviously, the sort of existential stress and, I am very affected by the news and that was really hard. But on the interpersonal, I was extremely lucky to be able to sleep in my mom's spare room, which is actually her office, which now has my bed in it for the last couple months, and have my sister nearby. I just hadn't spent that much time with my family in a really long time. So I've been lucky, I guess, is the short answer.
Have you had a really bad day where you were in tears or you were feeling claustrophobic?
Of course.
So how did you turn that day around? Or how did you feel better after that day?
Yeah, there was one day where I had a draft of a script that I was due, but the only person saying it was due was myself. My producer is sitting in LA in the middle of quarantine. I was like, I don't care. Take it. But I had put this deadline on. And, my whole family's really been on top of each other. I live in London, but I've been traveling for the last year with Jameela that I gave up my flat and was just living in LA and New York for the most part. And I had one day where I did just kind of burst into tears because I was just I think it was just hard for me to create mental space when I'm surrounded by so many people that I love and care a lot for, that being my family. I just found it quite overwhelming. And so what I would normally do, I did go on long walks. I started walking up to 20,000 steps a day at one point.
So you currently work as head of content at IWA. And I wanted to understand, you're doing a lot. You're doing so many different things. But is your full-time job with Jameela and working with her company?
Yeah, so I do a bunch of different things. I am full-time for Jameela. I produce her podcast with a production team in LA. So I have a larger team that I work with, and for the podcast, I'm mainly focused on research and booking guests and helping sort of figure out the angle we want to approach each talent with. I also produce her YouTube, so I'm in London. I'm shooting next week, which is really exciting. And then I developed our website, which was an editorial platform we launched in the winter. And then I'm also overseeing longer form entertainment projects. So that's totally a full-time gig, but I also do a bunch of other work on top of it. So I write my own scripts. I have a project with a producer in LA that I've been kind of heads down with for the last 6 months, which is really exciting. And then I also kind of consult other, mainly women, on building their media brands. So I have 3 different projects out of the UK right now that I'm pretty involved with, which I'm really excited about. But Jameela's the main focus, writing's the main focus. It kind of just depends on the week.
So what is it like working with her? She's quite a force of nature. I've seen her interviews and I've seen her speak at different events, and she dominates the stage with her, she has charisma.
She's amazing. Yeah.
So, what is it like working with her or catching up with her? I feel like she's so fast paced.
Totally. I mean, it's not boring. That's the one thing I have to say. The one issue I've never had of my job is being bored. She's wonderful. She really changed my life. And it's, I think definitely looking back on my career and my personal development, I will think of it as sort of before and after I met Jameela. She is not a normal boss in that she really cares about what's going on in your personal life. She has helped me be a stronger woman. She has helped me understand myself better. She's funny. I hope people know she's funny, but in real life, she's even funnier than ever. I mean, she makes me like deep belly laugh. She has that amazing sort of dry, dark, at times, inappropriate British sense of humor, which I just love. And she, what I love about Jameela is that she operates in so many different spaces. Yes, she's like this amazing Hollywood star and activist, but she also loves music, and she also loves comedy, and she loves politics. And I just love how varied she is as a person, because it means that she can connect with people from such different backgrounds because of, how many spaces she herself operates in.
What has working for iWay changed about your perspective on life and all the things? Because, I don't think there is a platform like iWay. It's so, it really talks to you. It's a conversational platform. I think it speaks to every woman. What has it taught you about women? I mean, you're probably there, like seeing the comments and the DMs and seeing the engagement. Yeah. What do you feel this has changed about you?
I think it's interesting. I don't know if I told you this before or over email, but I found iWay because I was a fan. Like, I got my job because I was someone who followed the account. What happened was that I was working in London, production company based in LA, but I was doing a project over in London, and it was like a Friday night, and it was raining, and my debit card was coming out of California, and I had to cancel all my plans. And I went home and I watched the Jameela and Sam Smith video, and I emailed just saying that I was a fan. And through that, I got my job. So I think what it's taught me mainly is the power of the internet. The fact that like me writing a fan mail changed my life and took me from living and working in London to flying to LA for a week and not coming back for months, and, beginning this new chapter of my career. Honestly, iWay has taught me that the internet can bring people together in really interesting, innovative, and beautiful ways. And that's been a really powerful realization. On a personal level, I think one area of activism I really did not understand before working for iWay was the concept of fat activism. Growing up, if I heard someone call someone fat, I thought that was really offensive. And learning that fat is a term that needs to be owned and empowered, and that fat women need to feel dignity and support, and that by saying fat is a bad word, we're basically saying that we're afraid of looking like, has been a really empowering experience. It's just crazy to me looking at, my writing and my thinking from a year ago, how much I've opened up to what like an intersectional feminist. Being pro LGBTQI has to include sex workers, and like understanding, I worked with a bunch of sex workers in New York from the Decrim NY movement, and getting to know those women, it was like, wow, I definitely, when I was younger, held negative feelings towards people in the sex work profession because I didn't know them. I didn't know what that actually meant. So definitely just like breaking the stigma and shame that I held around those issues, understanding the nuances of the trans experience and the kind of transphobic nature that we have in society. That's been really eye-opening. And also just understanding like just the fear, like the idea of shame has been really interesting to look at and see how it's affected all these areas of my life.
So my question is, you said that you sent a fan mail over to this account and then you got your job. Can you be more specific about the breakdown of how that happened? Because I think
Oh yeah,
our
it's
listeners
actually a
probably
really good
send a
story.
bunch of fan mail, but they don't get like a job in LA.
I know, I'm gonna say this and Jameela's gonna wake up to like hundreds of fan mail. All of this stuff is like, it's so weird. And it sounds really mystical, so I have to think of a way to talk about it where I don't sound too sort of LA woo-woo. But basically in October of 2018, sorry, I moved out of Los Angeles because I was really unhappy. And I'd hit a point in my life where I'd broken up with my boyfriend who I'd moved to LA with and for. I was quitting a couple of like work situations that just weren't working. They weren't leading to anything. I felt like I was letting people walk all over me, and I felt like I just didn't like who I was. You know, I think we all go through these periods when we're coming of age where we look around and we're like, wow, I don't identify with any of this. And I got to a point where I was looking at the options for what was next, and none of them looked very attractive. So I just kind of like blew my life up. I just like packed up my apartment and I went the last day I was in LA to this restaurant to drink, you know, discount margaritas with an old friend. And he goes, "Isn't that James Blake and Jameela Jamil?" So I'm sitting there at like a pretty like low point, drinking a margarita, packed up my flat, and sitting next to me is Jameela and James, you know. And I didn't think much of it, but then 8 months later, I was walking down the street in London, and I'd moved back to London. I was still working at the same job I had in LA, and I again was feeling like I needed to make a change. And I looked up and there was Sam Smith. And I'd just gone through a breakup and listened to more Sam Smith than I think I ever will again, because that's crazy amounts of Sam Smith. And I stopped Sam and I was like, "Sam, I just want you to know that like you've really gotten me through the last 6 months. Like, I love you." And poor Sam was, you know, a bit terrified. We took a picture together. And then 2 days later, that interview went up of Jameela and Sam. And for some reason, I think I just felt this like strong impulse to just email the account. And I was like, "Hi, I love this video. I think it's amazing. This is the work I've done. This is the work I want to do. Let me know how I can help." So, you know, on the one hand, it was practical in that I'd worked in my career to get to a point where I had something to offer them. But like all things, there was also a strong spiritual and personal moment where I felt like I had these signs that were, you know, maybe it was signs, maybe it was me stalking Sam Smith, but it was like messages that empowered me to reach out. And then from there, I met with one of the women that was working for Jameela. I met with her in London, didn't hear anything for a few months, met with her again, ran into her on the street.
My God.
I walk a lot, which is why I run into these people. And then about 6 months later, I flew to LA.
It just feels like it was written in the stars. I know it's such a cliche, but it just feels like all directions were pointed to this opportunity.
And there were like practical reasons why I could have said no. You know, it was like I was living in London, and, you know, that I thought I was going to go work for like a boutique production company here. And, you know, this was this new media company. A lot of it was sort of, you know, in the works. It was like, hey, we have this Instagram account, but what they're trying to, like, it was all really early days. And so I think in that moment, I really chose my gut over anything else, which is what I, you know, tend to do in my life, for better or worse.
Do you feel like your work with iWay has purpose, or do you feel like it's just a job?
I think it definitely has purpose. You know, I often talk about when I first started, well, truthfully, rewind, when I started following iWay after that Sam Smith interview, I saw a difference in how I looked in the mirror. I, you know, grew up perfectly able-bodied, I'm told and believe. And, you know, as a teenage girl, I had such anxiety about my body. And I was looking up to girls like Misha Barton and Keira Knightley, and, you know, I'm sure they're all wonderful women, but there weren't a lot of examples of women who had more athletic or more, you know, curvier body shapes that I was seeing. I'm sure they were maybe out there, but they weren't the ones on the front cover of NYLON magazine. And after following iWay and thinking about this idea that your body is a vessel to get from point A to point B and to allow you to do all your dreams and make your, you know, manifest the future that you want, and that we should be grateful for our bodies, that kind of thinking I really hadn't seen before. That was like really new to me. And so when I feel like it's really impactful is when I meet young girls who follow the account and say that it's helped them a lot. And when I meet moms who say that it's like taught them to stop body shaming their kids.
You know, you worked at a creative studio or at an agency. Can you tell us a bit about that experience and what made you make the switch?
So before I started working for Jameela, I was working for another startup actually, and it was a joint venture between BBH, which is a big branding agency, advertising agency, headquartered in London, but they have offices all over the world. And then Scooter Braun Projects, which manages a bunch of major Hollywood talent, Ariana Grande, Justin Bieber, Karlie Kloss. And they hired me when I was 23, right out of college. And I applied for a job that said development assistant. And then I got there and my business card said creative executive, which I didn't really even know what that meant. It was one of those titles in LA that like people in their late 20s seem to have, but I had no idea what it actually meant. And, you know, I think I worked there for 2 years. I had brilliant mentors there, brilliant bosses, I think maybe late 30s, who really believed in me when I was like 24 and didn't know what I was doing. And that was, you know, a really empowering experience to have so much freedom and leadership at such a young age.
You said at the beginning of the interview that you consult on, you know, for different women on developing their brands. How did that happen? Did you kind of attract these projects, or do you feel like you're subconsciously building, you know, your experience on strengthening brands for women, or strengthening female brands, or strengthening brands for strong women?
I think it kind of happened naturally. I really love helping people from different backgrounds sort of think through and strategize how they can build a message onto new platforms. So like most recently, Wells Frey Smith, who's this amazing assistant curator, she's at Whitechapel Gallery right now. She was at Pace before, and she called me up, and I ran into her in a pub like 2 years ago, but I hadn't seen her in ages. And she was like, I want to make a docuseries that shows people that anyone can talk about art. And I want to open up galleries to more people, because I feel like galleries and art history is so white and so patriarchal. And I want to open up arts education. And I was like, well, that's really interesting, because right now we're sitting in COVID. No one can go to galleries. I find myself missing public art and museums. And it would be really interesting to think about how we could start a digital brand rooted around the art community. You know, there's a great Instagram by Katie Hessel that goes through all the great women artists, and I love it. And I think that there's really a space for museums to get a bit more modernized in terms of their digital offerings. So with that one, it was just like, okay, you understand art, the art world, and she has the educational background to really talk about it from like an academic perspective. I have the digital experience, so why don't we come together and I can help you figure out what a docuseries format would look like and how this could be a larger brand. So a lot of it is interpersonal and just giving advice to my friends and people I know, and realizing that, you know, I might as well make it a more official position.
So how did you start charging, and how do you define your value, and how did you turn those maybe friendly conversations into a business transaction?
I mean, honestly, it's interesting. Whenever I'm trying to figure out money, I ask my female friends their advice, I ask my male friends my advice, and then I compare the UK and American feedback. So recently I got offered a price and I was like, this feels a little low. And across the board, my male friends said, that's offensive, like boost that rate. And my female friends were like, oh, I think you can figure it out, like go for it. Like, you know, God bless us, we're all trying. But I do think that within our culture as women, no one ever told me how to negotiate a price. Especially when I was coming up, it was like the age of like Man Repeller and Vogue and these like unpaid internships we were supposed to do while eating a sweet green salad every day and going to like the hottest restaurants at night. I mean, it was an unsustainable model. So what I've started to do is I have a fixed rate per hour that's like, I got it from a friend who works at Kickstarter in New York as a copywriter. I was just like, what are you charging? Because, you know, he has like a bit of a similar position where, you know, he's worked the same amount of years. You know, I just wanted to know. And he told me his rate. And at first I was like, LOL, how am I ever going to ask someone for that much money? But then I tried it on, I got a sort of freelance tech client, and I told them my rate. And they were like, yeah, that makes sense. And it was like the most empowering moment to realize, like, if you ask for something, the worst thing someone will say is no. And then you figure out a solution. The best thing they'll say is, sure, that makes sense. And that has taken a lot of work for me. I did a lot of work that was underpaid, that was, you know, especially as a freelance journalist, just like, you know, $50 for an article or whatever it was back in 2016, 2015. But at this point, you know, I have my fixed rates. And, you know, there are situations like some of the projects I'm working on, the founders are going out for funding, right? So it's like funding's not there. But, you know, I've made it clear that there is a sort of limit to how much work I can do before I get paid. And then once funding comes in, I've already set the groundwork for how much I expect, the percentage I expect, and how we can create like a long-term relationship.
That's so interesting, because I think when I started my company, and I still to some extent have this attitude of I'll take what I can get, because my day job is, I run a communications firm, and it's a real struggle because I think also the mentality of clients, especially male clients, would be like, you should be lucky that we're giving you this project. It's more like, this is what we're offering you, take it or leave it. It's a real challenge to kind of go back to the table and negotiate with.
There's always someone else though. That's the thing, is like, the world has gone bigger. We have the internet. Like, there's always someone else to go for. And I really think, and I'm saying this hopefully in the dream that if I say it enough, it'll come true. But the thing with women is that we don't have a problem getting the job done. Women are amazing. We can do anything that you put in front of us. The biggest issue, I think, for myself and my female friends is visualizing what it is we could do, So like, visualizing that you can get this funding and that you deserve this funding and that you are worthy of an investment is the hardest part of it. Actually going out and getting that funding, of course, like, we are multidimensional, resourceful beings. We can figure it out. It's just believing that there's something out there that we deserve.
We at O'Brien Hill have over a decade's worth of experience working with some of the world's most successful brands across F&B, retail, culture, and hospitality. We are equally at home helping a brand define its point of view, positioning a new development, designing product, packaging, or creating content that speaks to an audience. Whatever the challenge, we deliver sharp, intelligent, content-driven work that helps brands amplify their message to customers around the world. Contact us on www.obrionhill.com or DMing us on Instagram for your public relations, social media, and branding needs. You work on a podcast called the Daddy Issues Podcast. And you're a consultant on this platform. It's a podcast that mainly features the success of fatherless people. Where did this idea come from? And, how are you collaborating with them to bring this podcast to life?
This podcast was funny. I was in LA for Thanksgiving and I was staying at our head of operations flat while she was away. And I was feeling quite lonely, and I was on Dazed and saw that there was this podcast with Sharmadine Reed as a guest, who's amazing. She started Wild Nail. She's a brilliant female Black entrepreneur out of the UK. And it was hosted by the wonderful Anhera George Carey. And it was just this really interesting format where I was like, it is interesting to look at people who've had great success with single parents. Because in so many societies globally still, there is a lot of shame around the, quotation mark, broken family. So I listened to it and I sent another impulsive email, not thinking she'd get back to me. I was just like, hey, I love your podcast. At that point I was working for Jameela. So I was like, we have iWeigh, we have this website, could I interview for you for this website? And she immediately responded. She's the most enthusiastic actress and host and writer. She responded, with lots of exclamation points. And, 3 weeks later I was back in London and I went and met her. And I interviewed her, and it ended up being one of those interviews. First of all, bizarrely, the photographer she hired was a photographer I'd been trying to work with for years, who I'd once followed into the Dean Street bathroom, Soho House in London. Lily Bertrand Webb, who everyone should follow. She's the most amazing photographer in London. So she hired my dream photographer. We did this photo shoot, and then we went to our interview, and it was meant to be an hour, and I think we finished at 7:30, and I got there at probably 11 a.m. because we just had so much in common, and we just really bonded. We really connected. And then once again, I started like giving her advice. I was like, hey, here are some people I think would be great on your podcast. Like, here's some wording I think could help a bit with your pitch. Here's some press opportunities I think you'd be really good at. And it was a similar experience where I was like, okay, I don't need to be everyone's coach. Maybe I need to find a way that I can have like a more permanent role with this project. So I just asked her, I was like, hey, can I just be a consulting producer and help you, run through guests and just help you figure this out as a more long-term business strategy. So she ended up coming to New York, and then we're both in London for COVID, and it's been really interesting. She's now working on her book pitch to explore, to just put together a book for especially young people who lose a father or perhaps have an estranged father, to have a book that's like, hey, here are all these really amazing successful people who are just like you, and it's people like Barack Obama and Meghan Markle, and people who've had difficult fathers and have, risen above in a patriarchal society. It's really inspiring.
And are you writing the book for her?
No, I've written a bit of an introduction, basically a sort of, here's how this book will help you, and, welcome to this community, which was such a wonderful experience. To be able to write something that is part of a physical book is really exciting.
You're also working on a new digital platform called What the F Is This?
That's the museum thing I just talked about.
Oh, so that's the same one? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell me a bit about your early beginnings? Did you study journalism? Because, do you define yourself as a journalist or as a producer or as an editor? And where did this love for content and creating content come from?
I don't define myself as a journalist so much anymore, but I think I'm very much more in the sort of writer and producer role now, definitely compared to when I was younger. In terms of my career, I grew up between San Francisco and London, and I moved around a lot. I lived in about, I think it was 13 places before I went to college, and then another like 5 places by the time I was done with college. My family had moved around. So this like state of kind of constant transition. The one thing that was constant in my life, besides my mom, my sister, was my love for magazines. And NYLON magazine to me was like the coolest thing in the world. And I used to go after school in London and pick it up at the grocer, and I would put it all over my walls. And looking back, I think what I loved about these publications was this idea that they connected women and girls from all around the world. For me, having moved around so much, that was really attractive. And I think I was also someone as a kid who just sort of craved that attention. I dreamt of being on the front page of a magazine and feeling pretty and feeling empowered and feeling like, I really looked at those women on the front magazines like they were gods. And when I got older, it's interesting, magazines became a way for me to fit into a community. So I went to a school in London that I didn't feel like I fit into. I felt really out of place. And my junior year, I went to the head of the newspaper, who was a very confident man who went on to work for many Democratic nominees. And I went up to him and I was like, I want to start your website. And for me, it was a way to have a role within my community. I wasn't going to be the star, dance team girl. I wasn't going to be the star athlete. I wasn't going to be the star actor. Journalism was something that I felt like I could be and could do. And that followed me when I went to college. I again showed up and I looked around and I was like, okay, so I'm from the UK, but I have an American accent. I don't identify as much as a San Francisco, California kid anymore. I felt like in my college, there were definitely freshman year different identities that people seemed to operate in, and I just didn't feel like I fit into any of them. And so I decided to start a magazine because that would give me a role where, the musicians wanted to work with me because I might cover their new SoundCloud drop, or the theater kids wanted me to cover their play, and that, it gave me a role on campus. And that spiraled, I was able to interview really cool people in college, Beanie Feldstein from Booksmart and Lady Bird and How to Build a Girl Now, Tommy Kail, who directed Hamilton, just really interesting creatives. And then I interned for a bunch of different magazines, which I'm really nostalgic for, weirdly. It's there are a few things more fun than being 21 working for some, I was interning for NYLON actually in Soho, just like running around, like, picking up donuts for an article about the best donuts in New York City or whatever. It's amazing.
How do you feel about not like competitiveness, but just, I feel like I started my career with a bunch of different, people at the same time. And I've seen, like you said, the rise of this influencer wave. And I'm not saying everybody's an influencer, but I feel like I've spent so much of my time building a company, and they've spent time building a brand, and they have a community, and now they're able to monetize on their community. And I'm sure that financially I'm doing better because I have a team, and but still, like, the community is key, because to me, having influence is also having power, and you're able to channel that energy to projects and to passion projects.
I think it's amazing that I support anyone figuring out a way to support themselves, especially in our current climate. I think as long as they're not doing any harm to their followers, like, who cares? That's great.
How do you find, like, it feels to me like your lifestyle, you're quite career driven, your lifestyle is your work. You probably like hang out with the people you work with, and you're, in the places where, potential clients will be. Do you ever switch off? Do you take time off? Do you socialize? Do you do unrelated stuff to work?
Totally. I think the best thing I've learned in my career is how to write in a journal, how to exercise every day, and how to take naps when I need them on the weekends. It's like there's a lot of advice. I never was someone who read those books. Like, there's this book that every straight guy I know reads called The Defining Decade, about your 20s. And I don't know what it says in it, but I feel like it would probably, make me change my lifestyle and get a bit more productive. But I never read any of those books. I've been most inspired by listening to podcasts with people like Sharon Horgan, Kayla Cole, Candace Carty-Williams, like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Like, those have been the biggest teachers I've had in my career. And it's through podcasts like this. I don't know if anyone's going to feel that about me after this podcast, but we can hope. In terms of balancing my time, my career is really important to me. I've always wanted a job that was more of an identity than just a job. That's just how I grew up. I was craving a lifestyle and identity that was bigger than anything I saw right in front of me. And I wanted escapism. And I thought that if I had a job that was in media, that would give me the sort of validation I was craving as a kid. That said, as I've gotten older, I have learned how to balance my life better. To me, it's all about productive work and learning how to work smart, not just hard. Jameela is my number one priority in terms of, my producing work. Working in London when my team's in LA, I do work a lot at night, just because of the 8-hour time difference. I think it's mainly about just like blocking out time, so it's like, I am someone where I can kind of only think to do really productive work. I think you have to think about one thing at a time. So like, I'll be like, okay, cool. Like, today I am booking guests for these upcoming shows in London. And then tonight I'm just going to research for this upcoming podcast. A lot of the work I do, the sort of consulting stuff I do on the weekends, I do it on the train when I'm in between meetings. When I was coming over here on the train, I was texting Wells about her, project. What the fuck is this? That's what it's called. My own TV writing I do on the weekends and late at night. That's like my number one passion. That's what I eventually want to be doing full time. But that's something that I squeeze in as well. I think the most important thing is to learn your vices and how to control them. I know I can't go out too late. I know that I can't, indulge in any sort of partying during the week because I need to wake up early. I think the most important thing for me is just building a healthy routine where I feel like I'm in control of my time.
How do you book guests for shows? Like, because there's like an art to this. I know we book guests for shows as well, or for this show, and we also like book press opportunities for some of our clients. What are some of your tactics to securing that excellent interview?
I am always looking, but I like love people. There's some people who are very much, especially here in the UK, I feel like it's like, I just hate people. Like, I hate everyone. I'm the opposite. Like, when I was a kid, I remember I was like 6 and my parents were into jazz music and they took me to some festival, and I spent the whole festival following Bobby McFerrin around, which is, now that I look back on it, really niche and a bit creepy. But I think I've always just loved, that's like the best part of my job with Jameela, is like finding activists and being like, a star. Like, we can do something really exciting with you. Like, I'm always looking. Like, this morning I was on Instagram and I saw Alexandra Wilson. She's like 24 years old. She's a barrister in Essex. And she just wrote a book called In Black and White about being a like young Black woman in law in the UK. So I see her on Instagram. I immediately like send it to Jam. I'm like, this girl looks really cool. I message her agent. I'm like, would she be interested in doing some like content with us? So it's constant. You know, I do it on the bus, I do it on the train, I go to a party and I meet someone and I like, you know, figure out ways that we can work with them. It's a constant thing.
Wow.
But it's also about getting to know people. Like Jamie Windus is one of the people I've worked with the most at iWay. I met them at a Cafe Nero briefly, and we have become really close and we become really good friends. And because we are such good friends, I know how to make content that suits their long-term goals in their career, but also suits iWay.
Do you feel like it makes you a stronger person?
100%. I mean, it's funny. I wrote an essay recently about like realizing I wasn't as badly bullied as I had told myself. You know, I'd created this whole thing about like I was really bullied in high school and I was like this chubby kid that no one liked. And then I like went out for drinks with all these girls in New York who I thought didn't like me. And they were like the kindest, sweetest, most supportive people. They're just completely different than me. And it made me realize like I wasn't bullied. I was just deeply insecure. And I thought that these girls who, you know, had different interests, had different privileges, were slim, you know, got more attention from boys, I thought they hated me. But really, I think I just hated myself. Like, they're fine. They're really nice.
Wow.
You know, and that was a big coming of age moment this winter when I was like, a lot of times the people you think are out to get you, it's really just yourself. I mean, the bullies I think I had one kid call me fat when I was like, actually, I was about to say his full name, but I think that might be a legal issue. I think he's doing well. He's a shirt brand now. But I had like a kid call me fat when I was like 11. I had like one boy call me fat. I had girls at my English school just imitate my accent like constantly, where like, I'd be like, it's yogurt. I'd be like, no, it's yogurt. And they would just keep doing it to me until I just like left it with what Jameela describes as like a Rebel Wilson English accent from Bridesmaids, you know, just like hilarious fake English accent after all girls school.
I was going to ask you, how come you have an American accent, though, you know, you've been brought up?
Yeah, I lived in San Francisco till I was 12. My parents are American. My family's from like South Dakota, so very American. And then I went to university outside of New York. So if I hang out with like my old English friends, sometimes I'll catch myself being like, yeah, it's like quite nice. Or like, you know, kind of like this, like, I say quite a lot. I'm like, what is happening? But normally this is my voice.
I think you can go either one way or the other. I think you either come out of it stronger, but I've seen people bullied that have really, you know, become more introverted, more risk averse.
I definitely went through the thing of like, I didn't feel cool in high school and middle school. I felt bullied. And to be honest, I was really excluded in high school. And I did feel very much like people didn't understand me, and you know, I did feel like excluded. And so when I got to college, I definitely went through phases of being kind of a mean girl. You know, it was like this feeling of like, don't mess around with me. Like, it's insecurity. It took me a long time, I think, to learn how to be both confident and smart and empowered and also nice.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's something that, you know, I'm not particularly proud of, but it's true. You know, I definitely used to have a bit of like a sassy sense of humor. That's something that the last couple of years I've really learned to like embrace my vulnerability and my sweetness as like an empowering tool instead of a weakness.
You said something earlier, which was, I thought I was bullied more than what I really was. And I felt that people hated me, but I really just was hating myself. Can you tell me about, have you healed from that experience? Or, you know, how did you find a way to learn to love yourself?
I think it was when I started writing, honestly. I've always written, and I used to, you know, interviews was my thing. I loved writing articles that made other people feel good about themselves. Like, I kind of wrote the sort of articles that moms would put on their refrigerators for their kids at college. Like, that was just kind of my thing. But I think it was when I started writing comedy that I really saw a side of myself that I was really proud of. And the feedback I would get from people and the sort of teams I would build around these scripts, it was a really empowering feeling to be like, oh wow, like something comes from inside me that makes other people happy. And like something comes from inside me that makes people think and makes people feel seen and warm. And how wonderful is that?
That's awesome.
I think also, honestly, I've been single for a while, and I think that was really important in learning to like myself more. You know, it's really easy to put your worth on a partnership, to, especially as a woman, to like put your worth into something you're building with a man. And I think once I put that energy into my life and into my friendships, and, you know, I've met so many people the years I've been single. I've lived in 3 different cities. I, you know, spent time in like the Soho Theatre, London comedy scene. I've spent time in the sort of, you know, Jameela Hollywood activist scene. And that freedom to immerse myself and meet new people, I think that freedom really helped me learn that, like, oh wow, I can kind of manifest anything I want. And like, how powerful is that to be like, you know, if I want something, I can get there somehow. It's not going to be a straight route, and like, you know, I'm privileged in so many ways, but I do think that, you know, visualizing something is really important in terms of getting to your dreams.
So we know that you're working on iWay. You have a bunch of projects you're excited about. What would you like to be working on 5-10 years from now?
So this is something I've spent the last 6 months thinking about because I've been alone in my mother's apartment. My plan, in terms of like the immediate what's next, is that I'm filming these like mini interview series in London that I am so excited for and also so grateful to be doing. It's Jamie Windust, who everyone should follow and buy their book when it comes out end of October, called In Their Shoes. Jamie is doing an interview series called In Their Shoes, where they interview different people on the obstacles they've faced to be able to walk through their life every day with confidence. So it's very much about like overcoming personal and, you know, greater societal obstacles. And then I'm doing a show with Shante Joseph, who's an amazing writer. And then I'm doing a show with Otamere Gubeda, who's also an amazing writer. Shantae's show is interviewing Black talent on their careers and sort of how their careers have impacted with their mental health. And then Otamere's show is where he interviews people about the biggest heartbreaks they've experienced. So these are these like mini interview series I'm producing. It's just me from iWay in the UK right now, so it's a bit of a big project. But that's really exciting. Also filming with Amru Al-Qadi, otherwise known as Glamru, Stefia Boa, bunch of really interesting, exciting people. So that's kind of like short term, what's next. Longer term, my like long-term dream is that I want to be a full-time writer. I want to be producing like projects in the TV and film space. I have this script with Romil Sharma, who's a producer in LA. He's also one of my best friends. We've now done 2 scripts together. He, you know, worked at Lionsgate. He worked at ICM. He's now at End of Episode. And him and I, we are taking this project. We've been working on it for about 6 months. It's a TV pilot all about the intersection of social media, mental health, and activism. It's set between London and LA. It's very goofy, and it's doing really well in terms of the sort of feedback we're getting. So that script we are taking out. I'm finishing the pitch. Romil told me that I was allowed to speak about this podcast, but no specific details. He FaceTimed me at 1 a.m. in London, so 9 a.m. this morning to tell me no details.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening to an episode of the Woman Power Podcast. And thank you for downloading and streaming our podcast every week. If you love what you've heard, tag us on Instagram and follow the Woman Power Podcast and Woman Power Summit account for more information on our next episode. Please leave a rating review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps other women discover the show. That's it from me. See you next week.